So welcome to the Market Mentors podcast, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So before we get stuck into this one, I'd love to know a little bit more about you and your experience.
Yeah, so I didn't actually start my career in marketing and comms. I was actually an EA to the C-suite within a PR company and then in legal before transferring over into marketing and comms. And obviously since then, I've now been working for probably over 20 years now in marketing and communications as a field. I worked at Adecco for about 10 years before moving on to Starbucks in the press and public affairs team, which was a really interesting role. From there, I moved on to Thomson Reuters and was there for about 7 years, leading the European and then the global marketing campaign teams before moving into the public sector, actually at the NHS. And that was a role to really set up, lead and transform marketing, internal comms, press and public affairs for the entire NHS estate across the UK. So that was a really interesting role. And then prior to UPP, which is where I am now, I was at Capita, and there I set up and led a new function purely focused on industry marketing, ABM, and strategic bid support, which was to their private sector clients, amounting to about 2 billion against a 4 billion book of business, as well as also managing the kind of campaign team that was designing revenue generating strategies, very much driving retention, securing new business across multiple industry sectors. And then most recently from Capita have joined UPP as their CMO. UPP is the UK's leading provider of on-campus residential accommodation with we have something like 36,000 rooms in operation across some of the 15 world-leading universities across the UK. We've got about 1,000 employees, and since '98, I think the organisation's invested something like 3 billion into the higher education sector and homes to over 400,000 students. So great company to be part of. And my role there as CMO is quite wide, actually. So I'm part of the executive board, which is great to have a seat around the table as a CMO. And I'm responsible for all things marketing, internal comms, press and public affairs, investor relations, student experience, ESG and sustainability most recently, which is great to see added. And also we have a UPP Foundation, which is an independent charity funded by UPP that does some amazing things. So I'm really excited to be part of that. And actually, when I look back on my career and the fact I started out as an EA to the C-suite, it's actually something that I'm really grateful that I started my career in that environment, actually, as it's meant from a young age. I suppose I've always been quite comfortable at conversing and building relationships across businesses at all levels.
Yeah, superb. And it's quite unusual to see a marketeer that's worked for a business like Starbucks then go into a business like Thomson Reuters, and you've obviously done private sector, public sector. You're kind of almost ticking all the boxes there.
Well, it wasn't intentional, to be fair. I suppose that kind of just happened as my career progressed across the years. But it's one of the things when I look back, actually, that I'm really glad I've worked across lots of different industry sectors. I've worked for big global companies, but also worked for kind of smaller national companies. So I've really enjoyed that because they're all so varied and so different. And it just means you look at things slightly differently at all of those different organisations, really.
Yeah, it makes you a more rounded marketeer, I guess.
Well, hopefully.
Indeed. Well, we're here to sort of talk about the role of the CMO and how to get there. And in terms of sort of focusing on the role of the CMO itself to start off with, and I appreciate this will vary from company to company, but generally speaking then, what is a CMO responsible for that let's say a marketing director or a VP isn't?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I suppose probably, as I've just mentioned, I mean, my role here as CMO at UPP is much broader than just marketing, actually. So it kind of spans all facets of B2B and B2B2C, to be honest, within marketing. So it kind of covers both elements of that, as well as all of those other areas. Not all CMO roles are the same. And so for me, probably the crucial difference is probably about being part of setting that more strategic agenda, I suppose, for the business overall, with the customer, the consumer, and kind of brand at the heart of that. It's really funny actually, because becoming an active board member for me, and this is my first board executive role, it's actually been about almost letting go of some of those marketing aspects, which is ironic given that I've spent most of the last 20 years actually focusing on kind of developing and executing those marketing and comms skills across those different sectors. It's probably important to say I'd like to think that doesn't mean I'm not getting my hands dirty and I'm not working with the team to deliver it. And I probably try and do the opposite and try and deal with that strategic aspect of a C-suite role, whilst also trying to understand things as they are on the ground. I think many marketing jobs out there do that to a certain degree. But I think being a CMO and being skilled at marketing and comms and driving revenue gen and positioning the brand, I don't think that's enough if you really want to be a CMO. I think really being able to add to that and being able to network, I think getting out there and hearing directly from customers and consumers, I love that part. I love that part of my job. Building those relationships and having, I suppose, more importantly, a point of view at board level across lots of different topics, whether that's product portfolio, strategic direction of the wider business, financials, HR, for example. I think having that broader opinion and view is really important. I think as a CMO, I can obviously bring to the table that view on customer needs and changing markets and brand evolution and how that needs to change to address those needs and really make sure that marketing, I suppose, is an engine for the company. But at the same time, it's about, for me anyway, really working collaboratively with my kind of co-exec counterparts to deliver against that wider corporate strategy.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kate. I mean, that's how I see the sort of CMO role, is that your team, in effect, are your peers first, whereas at sort of VP and director level, your team is your marketing team first. Yeah. And I think a lot of companies, certainly from our perspective, go in and sort of think they want a CMO. The CMO lands, but actually what they really want is a VP to get stuck in there and do some demand gen. And they've hired that CMO too early. And
I think this kind of having an appreciation for the broader roles across that C-suite table. I always remember actually an article that's probably got well over 10 years ago now that had lots of different CMOs talking about their experiences coming into the C-suite. It's actually one I've never forgotten. And it said something like, in a CMO role, you have to try and think like a CEO, worry like a CFO, understand digital and IT like a CIO, appreciate operations as if you're running them as a COO, and care about people like a chief human resources officer does. So as well as, I suppose, having the presence of someone in sales. So I think it's a role that really does span across trying to bring all of that together and having an opinion across that as well.
I love it. So this is your first CMO role, as you mentioned. I think you're sort of 10 months into it. I mean, what's been the biggest learning curve for you then?
Yeah. So I've probably just mentioned that, I suppose, but trying, I suppose, for me, being all of those things at that executive level, whilst also trying to still keep skin in the game, right, and maintain that general knowledge and skill set across the marketing and comms arena. There's always new things coming onto the scene. I think building my teams, motivating teams with a common purpose for me has always been really, really important. So I think juggling all of those things, being able to prioritize those has probably been the biggest learning for me. And I think in addition to that, the fact that the role at UPP is so far reaching, I think it's fair to say that the last 10 months for me have absolutely flown by, to be honest with you. Really trying to prioritise and bringing those different facets of the role together has been the biggest learning curve.
Yeah, as well as getting your head around that kind of business. It's quite unique, isn't it? You don't find many businesses like that.
Yeah, and it's my first foray into, I've obviously worked across education in my roles at Capita and in other organisations, but this is my first foray into being solely dedicated within the higher education sector. So yeah, learning about the marketplace, building those relationships across my counterparts at universities has actually been one of my kind of highest priorities since joining as well.
Great stuff. And we hear a lot today about marketing's influence within the business. But what sort of 2 or 3 things are you personally doing to elevate marketing at board level then where you are?
Yeah. So I think probably a good question. Probably a couple of things, I suppose. So for me, making sure that I'm equipping myself, I suppose, with that knowledge I need to approach discussions at board level in the right way. So, typically a CFO or a CMO relationship is a bit like Superman and Lex Luthor, isn't it? I always joke about that with my CFO here at UPP. So I think I really try and tailor my discussion. So, with that person in particular or a chairman role or shareholders, I think when talking about marketing, it has to be those conversations about commercials and numbers and return on investment and how marketing is contributing to overall growth and actually driving company valuations. I think that's key. So definitely an area for me to develop further in is having a more extensive grounding in kind of financial and analytical skills for me. It's definitely something I'm looking into. I think that there's also something about we as marketeers, have this amazing access to data and analytics. And I think sometimes we use that and sometimes we don't. So I think really making sure that within any conversation I'm having at that level, that I'm bringing it back to the data, I'm bringing it back to that insight that we're getting from our customers. We've just launched, actually, in the last couple of months, a new innovation and enterprise hub at UPP. It's initially only internally focused, but that is going to branch out to students, our university partners. So really leveraging something like that, I think, is important because it brings new intelligence into those discussions that might not necessarily exist. And then I suppose from a more kind of C-suite level, I think, hopefully my career will continue on a successful trajectory across boards and exec leaderships. But I think if you think that there's not really that many roles out there and it's very competitive, I think most people that do land in these roles have tended to have had C-suite experience or governance experience previously. So for me, definitely looking at an additional NED role at some point to really build out that more kind of governance, director responsibility aspect to be able to represent marketing at that level. I think they're probably the 3 areas for me that are key.
Great stuff. And bearing in mind this was your first role, I mean, things like imposter syndrome is a topic that sort of gets discussed a lot these days, which is understandable. But given that this is a new role then for you, was there anything that you did to sort of prepare yourself for it then?
Yeah. So I have to say, and hopefully this is a good thing to say this, but I didn't, although this is my first kind of CMO role and formal role at exec level, I didn't actually go into the role with any feelings of not feeling like I wasn't ready for it, to be honest. I think I'd felt that after having held quite senior kind of marketing director roles and having worked across different sectors, like you said, and actually multiple disciplines within marketing comms, I did feel like, especially as I've had quite a lot of exposure within the C-suite environment on a daily basis for quite a number of years, that it was actually my time to hold that CMO title, to be honest. And I was really keen to get that role and start to add more value around a board table. So probably for me less about was I ready for the CMO role, but more about, I suppose, how could I be as successful as possible in the role from the outset. So I think for me, it's very much around this growth mindset, I suppose, like being confident in saying you don't have all of the answers yet. I think that that's an important trait to have going into any new job, regardless of level and irrelevant actually to how long you've been at a company. I think for me, the key thing I did to prepare myself in this role and continue to do actually is to listen and to build relationships, not just with my exec peers, but employees across the business and actually my own team. I'm really fortunate that I've got a really diverse team in that I've got some new people, but I've also got some people that have been part of the business for a very long time. They've been invaluable to me actually in helping me quickly learn about the business. My exec peers have been great in really helping me understand where we need to go. And actually the CEO herself invested quite a lot of time prior to me starting in really sharing information, really bringing me up to speed on kind of the I suppose, the vision and the mission for this role. So I felt like before I'd even started that actually some of those relationships had been built, which has been invaluable to me actually.
Oh, that's really good to hear, actually, because you do hear sometimes it's almost like a very cold start from when you land in on the first day. But fair play to your CEO. Sort of shifting the sort of questions then more onto sort of focusing on becoming a CMO. Then, I mean, if you're speaking to ambitious B2B marketers who are sort of early on in their career, what advice would you give them to help them become a leader in the future? Then.
Yeah, so I suppose probably a couple of areas. I think having that ambition in the first place is really, really important, knowing that you've got that ambition and taking risks. I think that desire to always want to do more creatively that sets you apart from the crowd, and that aspire to kind of constantly learn and improve and make something better. It goes back, I suppose, to that growth mindset. I think that doesn't only help produce results, but it makes work more fun. I mean, we spend most of our time at work, so actually being creative, taking those risks and working on different things and challenging the status quo, I think is really important. I think hard work, I know that that's a cliche and everyone probably says they work really hard, but I do really believe that hard work gets rewarded. I've been really fortunate actually across my career to work with some amazing, inspiring people that have really pushed me to achieve more. I suppose often at the time you might not feel like that, but I think having people around you, managers, leaders, teams that support you and celebrate the success with you, as well as kind of recognising those areas for improvement, I think is crucial on that journey on becoming a leader. And then I think probably there's something around delivery. So always delivering, execute against what you say you're going to do. Over promising and under delivering is never going to set you up for success. And if you are going to take those risks and want to take those challenges, you need to be able to build that trust initially. So doing that aspect of the delivery and the execution, I think, is key. And then I suppose the final piece on that for me that I've always felt quite passionate about is your personal brand. So authenticity. I think I remember someone saying to me years ago, what would people say about you when you leave the room? So I think, trying to harness those three areas, but also thinking about your personal brand so that you're leaving the right impression with people as you kind of progress in your career, I think is important, whether you're 16 or 60, to be honest.
No, indeed. And you've obviously managed teams in the past. I mean, just sort of following on from that sort of question. When you've had a team of people working for you then, have the people that have sort of been shown to be leaders or have that quality then kind of gone out of their remit a little bit? Have they been sticking their hand up and saying, okay, well, actually, I know you want to do that. Can I run that project? Or how about I present to the sales team? Or, could I take something off your workload to help you? Maybe sort of the the budget or the analysis or something like that. Have you seen people that have sort of exuded those sort of natural qualities actually do that kind of stuff then?
Yeah, definitely. I think this piece, the bit you mentioned there about taking on additional projects, I think that actually spans beyond just kind of showing a leadership quality and a desire to want to do more. I think that's actually a very, very clever way of expanding your network and really, I suppose, really increasing your personal brand beyond just your initial team. I remember at TR, Thomson Reuters in particular, it was there where I was really fortunate to have an excellent set of different mentors, internal and external. And I'll never forget actually some advice that I got back then, which was about, those projects that you do take on that are extra, don't just take them on because you want to look like you're a SWAT and you're doing the right thing. Take them on because actually you're going to learn something, or you're going to get exposure to someone senior within the business or someone different within the business in a different area that you want to learn around. So I think actually the type of people that display those do it, but if you do it correctly, you're actually going to do more than just show up within your team. You're actually going to benefit through those and really kind of explore how you can expand your networks, develop your skills, and be involved in something that you might not necessarily have been involved in naturally.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. And if we think about sort of progressing and developing your career, then how would you sort of weigh up working for the right business versus working for the right person?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, and obviously I've worked across lots of different organisations, I think it probably really depends on what you're looking to get from your next job that you probably don't already have, and really putting together that list for you for what's important to you specifically. So, is it what the company does, I suppose, and ultimately sells? Is it a workplace culture, especially now, given everything we've seen in the pandemic across the last couple of years, in order of having a better work-life balance? Is it the title? Is it a CMO title, a director, a head of? Or I suppose, is it a particular boss? I think for me personally, it's always been about being really clear on what it is that's motivating you at that particular time, I suppose. And I think there's always going to be pros and cons, right, to every position. I definitely recall across my career, and I won't name the company, but, I've worked for some companies where I've sold products as part of the marketing that I wasn't particularly passionate about, if I'm being really honest. But, for me personally at that time, running a global team, really getting exposure within that type of global matrix organisation was something at the time I didn't have. And so for me, having that experience was probably my number one priority. The older I've got, the companies I work for and the experiences that we create are definitely more important to me than when I was younger. I think money as well is a driving factor, isn't it? But it isn't always a key factor. And I think at different times throughout your life, I suppose salaries are going to be a driving force. But again, sometimes taking that sideways step or actually a step down within a larger organisation and focus on that priority is key. I think it goes back to this really, surrounding yourself with people that you can learn from being really important. I think that's true regardless of age, level of experience, titles. I think it's really important, I suppose, to just trust your gut. I think regardless of what other people's opinions may be, there's definitely been a few occasions across my career where I know I've made decisions that others have maybe gone, really? Why are you joining that company, or why are you going to work there? But I've known deep down that they're the right ones for me. So I suppose trust your instinct, and do what's right for you for that point in time of your career.
Yeah, I always think about your career as sort of stepping stones as well. Yeah. You're not always thinking about the next job is the last job or the job forever. It's about where you want to get to in your career, wherever that might be. If it be CMO, or if you want to be an internal, sort of contributor, you don't have to be a CMO at all. So just thinking about it more in terms of, okay, is it going to allow me to get to where I want to be? And is it the business and the growth of that business, or is it the person who I've interviewed with who's really inspiring? Like you said, you've got to kind of weigh things up, really.
Definitely.
A question that comes up a lot, I would say, is if you are thinking about becoming a CMO, as an example, is it to specialise, or is it better to be a generalist marketer?
Yeah. I've seen that question a few times. I think every senior leader has some element of specialism, don't they? Otherwise, how would they have started their career journey? I think for me, when I first started out in marketing and comms, it was very much initially in communications and PR as a specialist. Then I moved into event management, then into public affairs and CSR, and then into marketing actually probably a bit later on, and then actually into ABM and so on. So I think for me, I've tried to do both, I suppose, in order to have that greater general knowledge across all areas, because I actually think that makes me a better leader by understanding what my team need to do and how they do it, because I've done it myself. I think it depends on you again and your ambitions. If you want to be an SME in a particular topic and only in that area, then of course I think you absolutely need to specialise in that field. But I think if you want to broaden out your leadership expertise, then for me personally, I think it's about adding as many strings to your bow as you can. And really, assessing what you want to do and what you have at your disposal to meet those goals. I have to say, for me, across every job that I've taken on, I make it a point actually that I always take something on new that I've never done before, to kind of 100%. So, there's things I've done side of desk before, maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but actually going into new roles, there's always areas that I think, do you know what, that would be amazing to get involved in. So I think having the general knowledge, but being able to understand the specialisms and niches is important.
Great stuff. Now, it would be not great of me to sort of have you here and not talk about some sort of general B2B marketing trends, given your experience and what you've achieved so far. And obviously, account-based marketing is something you've mentioned, something that you've been involved in. It continues to sort of pace, really. You're hearing about it all the time. But for those marketeers or companies who are thinking about implementing it, then what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so it does still continue at pace, doesn't it? I've set up probably now ABM strategies at the past 4 organisations I've worked at, and actually we're just implementing that here at UPP now, so that's exciting to see. I think every organisation is so different, and I think the right ABM strategy will be different for each of them. So I think one of the most important things is, just as the case is with our customers and how we always say marketing and comms strategies need to be tailored to them, your ABM strategy has to be tailored to your organisation and to the objectives you want to achieve, because I think they're all so different. I think establishing key account marketing at Thomson Reuters was when ABM actually was still in its infancy in comparison to the marketplace now. And I definitely learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. I think Capita is probably a great example of implementing it from scratch. One of the first pieces we did was to really kind of get everyone on the same journey and swimming in the same direction. So we created this ABM playbook, which was designed to outline kind of the core principles of what ABM at Capita was and how we envisaged that would work in collaborations with sales, business development, various other functions. And so that was kind of really centered around being collaborative, insight-led, personalised, outcome-driven. And it was the way in which that worked actually and was quite successful was that everyone was really clear on what their role was. And from a marketing perspective, and specifically for the ABM team, they knew that their role was to help through campaigns, collateral, position kind of opportunities for pipeline growth. They knew that they were there to help support sales and BD with building relationships across stakeholder profiling, that type of stuff. So I think having that clear alignment on the role that marketing plays, I think is crucial. At Capita, when I was there, the account team initially made those decisions on which accounts were in the programme, which was just how it worked at that point due to the nature of the business. There was multiple accounts across multiple sectors. What I've found quite different and very refreshing here at UPP is that actually we're involved in that discussion in a very different way with a sole sector focus, which actually makes it even stronger. So, we're a key input and player in a delivery arm of the ABM, but actually, even on the stakeholder mapping element of it, we're responsible as a partner, not a supporter, for developing our own executive relationships. So I think for me, seeing how ABM has grown over the years across different organisations, really, if you're implementing it from scratch, really explore the different methodologies that are out there, one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many, whatever different people call it, and design the right one for you. And don't be afraid to leverage the data and insight that we as marketeers have within our arsenal, so that your kind of role is appreciated as a key partner and not just an executor of the strategy.
And at UPP, are you tending to sort of work in pods then, are you, quite early on? Is that where you guys are brought in then to sort of help with the profiling earlier on than you have been in the past?
Probably, but we're probably brought in much earlier than just the profiling aspect of it, to be honest. So we're actually involved in the decisions around the prioritisation of the kind of accounts. Why are they there? Which ones would we run with first? Marketing is definitely what I've found refreshing. I'm not saying it hasn't been the case at some of the other organisations I've worked at, but marketing is genuinely seen as a true strategic driver of growth. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And whether that is down to the CMO role being on the board, having a seat at that table, I think that does contribute to it. But actually the culture here as well is very much around, working together as that team to bring your expertise into the table. I always say this to my team, and I don't know if I should share this in the podcast, but I remember when I had my daughter, everyone used to always say to me, when you go into that operating theatre, you've got 10 doctors around you, but every single person around that table knows what they're experts at and knows their role. You never get one doctor saying to the other, "Oh, should you be doing it like that?" Or "Have you thought about doing it differently?" And so for me, I've never forgotten that personal kind of analogy really on ABM, and I think the same is true in the professional workplace.
I like that analogy. Having been there myself with my wife, it's good to know that they've all got jobs.
Don't use that in the if there's a written element of it, though.
And sort of, we have to, I guess, talk a little bit about maybe the pandemic and COVID and sort of how that's influencing things. But how do you see sort of that landscape changing then, the marketing landscape changing, and how it sort of might impact B2B and B2C marketing strategies then?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'm responsible for both sides of the coin. So I actually find it quite intriguing, I would say, as to how many thought pieces are out there. And I don't know if fellow listeners agree, but just the number of various new acronyms that are out there. I've heard, obviously, we've spoken about ABM, we're talking about B2B, B2C, but I've also heard of ABE, B2E, and one that I saw actually a couple of weeks ago, which made me chuckle, was H2H, which sounds more like a train line, if I'm being honest. But I think, in all seriousness, though, in a world where, especially post-COVID, right, the companies are trying to balance this massively increased demand of customer expectation, engagement, creating these kind of great end-to-end experiences. I think for me, the evolution is about, bringing all of what works across all of these different acronyms and strategies and tactics together, tailored to that industry you work in and the company you're part of. I think it's really interesting if you think about B2E is supposed to be about this culmination of everyone, everything, everywhere. B2B is this, single view of an account with multiple buyers. B2C is the individual, H to H, which for those of you, if you didn't know what it is, it means human to human. I think when companies actually define themselves as a B2B or B2C company, I actually think they can limit themselves in some cases. I think, in B2B, if your primary goal is to sell to a business, you often sometimes bypass channels, right? Like an Instagram or a Pinterest, because you don't necessarily consider those channels to be business. And that's changing. And it's the same on B2C, just because they're a consumer audience, why would you bypass LinkedIn? It doesn't mean that your buyer isn't necessarily on those channels. So I think this labeling actually sometimes forgets that it's often people, right, that decide to purchase our products, our services. And you could really be missing out on key segments without realizing it. I think, even if you're selling to huge global corporates, ultimately it's a single person or a small committee that's going to be signing the contract and making those decisions. So I think as marketeers, I suppose we all talk about all the time, don't we? Tailoring messages, bespoking, knowing our audiences. If you're basing that messaging purely on a business benefit or a consumer behaviour, you're really going to miss out on the ability to connect with that person behind the decision. So I think it's about the amalgamation of all of it that I'd like to see, and how that evolves over the next few years.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen more on the sort of personal branding side. So going back years, it was much more about, from what I see anyway, more about the company taking things forward. Whereas now you see certainly within a lot of our customers on the B2B tech side, it's actually individuals. It's the personal branding side, and especially through channels like, LinkedIn that you've talked about, you can get a huge amount of traction there around an individual within a business rather than just the business itself.
Definitely. It's that combine. I suppose it's combining that persona, isn't it, to a personality, which I think actually from a data and analytical perspective is actually really exciting.
Mm-hmm. So where do you learn from as a CMO? Where do you go to learn more?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the most, I'm part of various CMO networks, which I find hugely helpful. I do read a wide array of publications that are related to our field. Some of the most valuable discussions that I actually have are with some of the other C-suite titles, so CEOs, CFOs, and COOs. I've found that incredibly helpful over the last couple of years. One of the most influential courses, though, that I've done across my career was actually a Woman on Boards course in the UK a few years ago, and it wasn't just about the course material, but was actually from the other leaders in the room with me. And one of the key kind of takeaways for me around that was the ability to build on your strengths and not weaknesses, and that surround yourself with people who are good at what you aren't. And actually to be confident in that, which I think is hard sometimes, isn't it, right, for people to go, do you know what, actually, I don't know what that means, or I don't really understand that. And so for me, that was definitely a course, learning from people around me and really valuing kind of teams that are diverse in personality gives you that richer degree of ideas. So I suppose, in summary to your question, as cheesy as it might sound, it's probably a bit of a blend. I try and continue to learn from everyone around me. Even my 10-year-old daughter, she's so much better than me at designing a website, and she tells me that constantly, by the way. She can engage online digitally and understand how technology works almost automatically. It's scary. And actually, even more scary than that is the fact that she's actually the customer or consumer of the future, and the person that is going to be behind future purchasing decisions. I mean, she's already involved in a number of purchasing decisions that I think probably we as marketeers need to try and reach these buyers of the future. So if we can't do what they do, or at least understand how they do it, we've got some work to do. So I suppose in summary, try and learn from, as many people at all different age groups across wherever and whenever you can.
Superb. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Kate. It's really interesting talking to you because of the different types of organisations that you've worked for, and particularly so because you're fairly new into a CMO role. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about, how you found that and some of the areas around working with those different sort of C-suite people. So thank you very much for giving up your time. If people want to get hold of you or follow up or any more sort of questions, what's the best way of them doing that?
Definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to speak to you. Hopefully those of you listening in have found it useful, and thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.